Now, before we examine the criteria for an imam, let's briefly talk about the shura over here. Because you will find other schools of thought, when it comes to the position of imamah, of who's an imam, they will tell you that we have the principles of shura mentioned in the Quran. Therefore, when it comes to choosing the imam or the khalifa or the successor, the Quran has instructed us to engage in shura. What does shura mean in English? Consultation. Meaning you, the ummah, gather and decide who the imam would be. We have to address this very important argument that other schools of thought have mentioned. Before we examine these two verses of shura, we have a very valid question here. If the way to choose the imam and the khalifa is by shura, then why is it that none of the first three caliphs became caliphs through shura? How is it that you're teaching Muslims in history that you guys need to choose your imam through consultation, but none of the first three caliphs were actually chosen through the system of consultation? Isn't that a joke? Let's briefly elaborate on that. As for the first Khalifa Abu Bakr, he was not chosen by shura. Initially, 5 pledged him allegiance. Then they intimidated others to follow. You think there was a referendum in Medina? Oh, people come. Let's do a shura and choose, this next Khalifa. No, a group of people, they happened to gather under the tent of Saqifa, and it just quickly happened. What about other villages and neighboring areas? How come they had no part in this shura? He was clearly not appointed by the shura. And the biggest proof that it wasn't shura, in Bukhari and other sources, when Omar ibn al-Khattab, when he describes how Abu Bakr was appointed, when he describes the first caliphate, you know what word does he use to describe it? Falta. What does falta mean? Slip. Something that suddenly happens without preparation. That's the meaning of falta. And he says, Faltatun waqallahu sharraha. God really protected us from the slip. Wait a minute. Why are you describing the caliphate of Abu Bakr using a word like that? Does that mean there was really shura and it was an instruction of the Quran? Or it's something that you guys cooked and suddenly happened? And he says, Omar, this should not be repeated again. It's a falta, it should not be repeated again. Wait a minute, if it's a Quranic principle, why don't you want it to be repeated again? In fact, you should tell Muslims, just like we chose our first Khalifa, you guys should do the same. We don't see that. In fact, if Abu Bakr's caliphate and how he was chosen was according to the principles of Quran, then those who selected him like Umar should come out and proudly say, yes, that is how you choose a Khalifa and you teach the new generation of Muslims to do the same. That's something you should be proud of. This is something you should teach other generation of Muslims. But do we find that? No. Instead, what do we find? No, he's like, it was, a falta. It was a slip. It was something that just happened without any preparation, and it should not be repeated again. And that's why they did not repeat it again. That's the second argument here. How was the second Khalifa chosen? He was appointed by who? What happened to the Shura? Where's the Shura? Just threw it out the window? What happened to the Shura? Third Khalifa, how was he appointed?
6 members.
By 6 people. How many Muslims were there in the Muslim Ummah? Thousands? Tens of thousands by that time? Why only these 6? Who came up with this criteria anyway, that you only have these 6 people? What kind of shura is this? And by the way, if really choosing the Khalifa is supposed to be through shura and consultation, don't you think the Prophet ﷺ should have explained to us what are the limits of this shura? Who's involved in it? Who's qualified? Who should be part of it? He just leaves it open-ended like that. At least tell us. Do the people of Medina count? Do we have to ask other villages? Okay, in Medina, you've got thousands of people. Who's qualified to be part of that shura? Everybody? All companions? Half of the companions? Those with these qualities? I mean, when you go to any country, to any organization, and they have an election system, in their bylaws, they have rulings on how this election is to be conducted, right? Do you find an institution which says, yeah, you should have elections, but I don't have a way for you to conduct elections. I don't know, just go and do it however you want. That's a joke. So if really it was shura, how come we don't see the Prophet explaining to us the procedure? So that in itself tells us khilafah and imamah is not by shura. And the biggest proof is that those first three caliphs, they did not even implement shura when it came to their khilafah. They want others to implement them. You guys should be role models for Muslims. If you didn't implement the shura, other Muslims are going to implement the shura. And that's exactly why throughout history you have dictatorships in the Muslim ummah. Where's the shura? Because those three set the precedent that it's by dictatorship. It's not by shura. That's a problem. Now let's briefly examine these two verses of the shura. The first one is verse 159 of Surah Ali Imran, the third chapter in the Holy Quran. 159. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. God is commanding the Prophet, consult them in the affair. That's the meaning of this verse. Some of them have cited this verse to say, yes, see, you have to consult. So when it comes to choosing the Khalifa, you have to consult. Let's technically analyze this verse. This verse is speaking to an authority, who is the Prophet ﷺ, whose authority has already been established. We know he's been chosen by God. Then the verse is telling the Prophet, you who are an authority and you are the leader, consult your companions when it comes to some issues. It's not saying that when it comes to choosing that leader and the one who has authority, you take the path of consultation and shura. Where in the verse does it say that? The verse is talking to someone who's already an authority, who's a prophet, whose authority has been already determined by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now that you've been chosen by God, Allah is telling him, consult in some matters. That's all. That's all the verse is saying. Where in these words, وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ, do you understand that khilafah and the one who succeeds the Prophet should be by consultation? Where is that in the verse? The verse is not addressing that aspect. And I'll honestly ask you right now, look at this verse. وَشَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. 3 words. Consult them in the affair. Do you really, between you and God, do you see this verse talking about an important position, like who's going to succeed the Prophet? Do you see that in the verse? Do you see a clear instruction in the verse about this? About such a critical matter? Do you see that or no? If you do, we can discuss it, that's fine. So our argument is that this verse cannot be the basis for shura when it comes to selecting the Khalifa who represents the Prophet. And then that same verse says to the Prophet, you consult them, but in the end, the decision is yours. Because after that, the verse says, فَإِذَا عَزَمْتَ فَتَوَكَّلْ عَلَى اللَّهِ. The verse says, شَاوِرْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْرِ. Yes, consult them. But then once you want to make the decision, you, not them. Once you're making the decision, rely on Allah and just do it. That means in the end, how many people are making the decision? 1. So really, this is just a moral instruction to the Prophet. Ya Rasulullah, in the end, you have to call the shots. You're the Prophet. Just consult them. Respect them, make them feel important, make them feel that their opinion also counts. That's all. In the end, you're making the decision, not them. Which is even proof that this verse is about someone whose authority has already been established, who already has authority from God, and he's going to make the decisions. He just has to consult his companions just to show them respect. That's all. That's the first verse. The second verse, Surah Shura, verse 38. وَأَمْرُهُمْ شُورَى بَيْنَهُمْ. And their affairs is a matter of consultation between them. So they're claiming that Khilafah is part of the affairs of these people, and therefore it's subject to consultation. Very brief point over here. Very brief objection. The verse is saying those affairs which belong to them should be subject to consultation and shura. Question, Khilafah and the Caliphate, is that the people's affair or the affair of God? Does this verse say anything about that? No. Why are they assuming to begin with that Khilafah is from the affairs of the people themselves? Then it would be subject to consultation. No. Maybe Khilafah is, as we shall see later, Khilafah is the dominion of God, not the dominion of people. So using this verse, like the verse of the Shura, and applying it to the Caliphate is a logical fallacy over here. Because they're assuming that Khilafah is part of the affairs and the dominion of the people, then that means they can consult about it. No, it could be the dominion of God. I'll give you an example. Let's say the Constitution says, the people, the citizens of this state, they decide and they elect on their affairs. And then you have the Supreme Court. Now in our country, who directly appoints the Supreme Court justices? Who appoints them? The President. Now can people come and object and say, no, wait a minute, the Constitution said, we the people decide on our affairs. Why is the President choosing and selecting the Supreme Court judges? When the Constitution says you decide on your affairs, that means those affairs that have been established to be your dominion and you can vote on them. But if something has been assigned to the President, that's not your dominion anymore. That's the President's dominion. Same thing over here. When it comes to Khilafah, we have Quranic evidence and prophetic hadith which says Khilafah is the dominion of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He chooses. So you can't subject that to the consultation. In any case, upon objectively, unbiasedly examining the verse of consultation, we see no clear reference to Khilafah. The Prophet did not talk about it and the limits of it. None of the first caliphs implemented it. And you want us to believe that this Khilafah is by consultation? Show us a historical precedent from the Prophet's life, from even the caliphs' lives. Fine. We'll accept that from the caliphs' lives. There isn't such a precedent. That means Khilafah, Imamah cannot be by consultation. There is no evidence for that. So next we are going to examine then how is the Imam chosen? Is there anything in the Prophet's life that tells us more about how an Imam is chosen? This is a very, very sensitive discussion. It's a very critical discussion too. Because most Muslims in history have not taken this evidence. So it's very important for us to discuss this and analyze this. And what about the verses of the Holy Quran? When it comes to the words and positions like Imam, Khalifa, what does the Quran say about them? Are they by the designation of God, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala leaves it for the people to decide the Imam and the Khalifa? This is something that we will examine next week inshallah. وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وآله الطاهرين.